This is the American Horror Story Iceberg. It's going to cover everything you need to know about the show, a lot of theories, a lot of behind the scenes stuff, and just general trivia. So I hope y'all enjoy. I'm trying to hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. We're a little bit off, but I think we can make it happen. I definitely need some help though. So thank you and enjoy the video. Michael Langdon is the longest overarching story throughout the show, reasonably so given that he is the actual Antichrist. We first see him in Murder House as the baby of Vivian and Tate, with his twin being stillborn. Constance, their neighbor, takes Michael away from them and essentially adopts the baby, but comes home when he's a toddler to see he murdered his nanny. Continuing on over to the Apocalypse season of the show, in a flashback of Michael's teenage years, he is taken away by a group of Satanists and forms a close bond with one of them named Mead. After killing a butcher for refusing to sell Mead a goat's head for some ritual, he's taken into the police station for questioning. He's then broken out of jail by warlocks and taken to the Hawthorne School for Exceptional Young Men. It turns out he's so talented that he even passes the 7 Wonders test, which is usually only done by witches as they're more powerful, and he's proclaimed as the next Supreme. I don't want this intro to take up the whole video, so he basically then weasels his way into the powerful world leader's circle and manages to orchestrate a nuclear holocaust which destroys all life in the world. 18 months into the nuclear winter, Michael shows up to Outpost 3 and causes all sorts of trouble up until the witches show up. Eventually, I think they went back in time and have Mallory run over the teenage version of Michael in the road as he leaves the murder house. Doing this just erases the entire Apocalypse timeline and then saves the whole world and restarts everything right when he died. Roanoke hints and Murder House. There are a lot of similarities between the Roanoke and Murder House seasons since they're basically just the same core concept of a house filled with lost souls. In Murder House, one of Ben's patients was horrified by the urban legend of the Piggy Man that has to do with a pig-masked butcher who went around killing people in the 1890s Chicago's World Fair. In Roanoke, this character actually makes another appearance and we find out that his real identity is Kincaid Polk, but he also gets killed by the butcher and skewered over a fire. Tate and Violet were originally going to be in American Horror Stories. If you haven't watched the separate series yet, American Horror Stories is a bunch of standalone stories that relate back to Murder House a lot, with 3 of the episodes being based around the Murder House. Producers debated giving Violet and Tate cameos in the show, but this never ended up happening and making it to the final cut. If it helps, Ruby and Scarlet are essentially just a newer take on Tate and Violet. Not to get too much into detail here, but it's implied in the show that Ruby and Tate know each other, as she can be seen wearing an older, worn-out version of the t-shirt that Tate wore in Murder House reading, "Normal People Scare Me." The Name Game. Nothing too deep here, but it's just a song performed in the Asylum season by Sister Jude. She pretty much just rhymes names together. The actual reason the scene was filmed and added to the show was because it was so emotionally draining to film Asylum with how gory and depressing it was, and the scene lightened things up for the actors, so to speak. Richard Ramirez Hotel Plot Hole. With the overall storyline being very deep and intertwining, it didn't take fans too long to notice a certain mistake made by the creators after the 1984 season came out. In this, they state that the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, died in 1984, being stuck in Camp Redwood as far as we know up until 2019. However, in the hotel, it is said that he died in prison in 2013, which is the real-life fate of the Night Stalker. Some people say it's an adverse effect caused by Mallory's actions in Apocalypse by messing with the timeline, but honestly it's probably just a mistake made by the creators. Siren season. Basically in early 2021, the show's co-creator Ryan Murphy asked fans to choose the themes for season 10 with possible options of aliens, Xmas horror, Bloody Mary, Piggy Man, plague, and sirens. In the end, Sirens and Aliens both won, which led to a double feature season. The Siren season was named Red Tide and was basically a commentary on the opioid epidemic with blood-sucking talented people in there as well. To explain this idea a little bit further, sirens in Greek mythology are mermaid-like creatures, which I guess the references to them are there in the season, but I don't really see a big focus on it. Nepotism babies. This is referring to a clear issue in AHS's casting, as a lot of the actors are simply casted due to being children of popular figures like Cher's son, Michael Jackson's daughter, and Cindy Crawford's daughter. None of them are bad at what they do, but some fans get upset knowing that there are definitely harder working actors out there whose parents just aren't famous. You Got a Dog. In the Murder House season, there's a pretty popular scene where Vivian and Ben are arguing, and Ben explains the reason he cheated on her is because she got a dog after the miscarriage, instead of spending her time coping with Ben. I'll just play some of the scenes so y'all can understand why it's such a popular thing in the series.
Tell me how you really feel.
You got a dog.
I needed you, and you got a dog.
Tate was possessed by a demon. Like we discussed in the first entry, Tate was the biological father to Michael Langdon, the Antichrist. However, when he conceived the baby with Vivian, he was most likely possessed by the devil himself to put the child into the world. This was made possible because of the murder house's role of pretty much being a portal into the afterlife and otherworld along with that. His mother is the one who points out the idea to the audience, but Tate himself also acknowledges it by clearly not claiming the child as his own. Constance is a witch. Some theories will say that Constance, the old creepy neighbor to the murder house, is actually a witch. They back this up by pointing out that she almost always knows what is happening in the murder house while mostly never going inside, implying that she is possibly clairvoyant or able to read minds, which isn't possible because we know that Murder House and Coven are set in the same universe. Hotel in Roanoke being taken off of Netflix. Well, yeah, basically back in October 2021, Freak Show, Hotel, and Roanoke were all taken off of Netflix. All seasons ended up leaving the platform due to FX on Hulu being launched, where all of AHS was moved over to Hulu instead. This and American Dad are literally the only reasons I pay for Hulu, but it's definitely worth it. Connie Britton was supposed to be in Coven. In an interview with Rolling Stone in 2013, she was asked if she was going to be in the upcoming season, and she replied with, "I hope so. I've actually been talking to them this season because they're down in New Orleans and I'm in Nashville, and said, okay, let's see if we can try to figure something out." But to the dismay of fans, this never ended up coming to fruition. Moira isn't a ghost. Some fans have pointed out that when Moira was killed by Constance, she was much younger, and when we see her as the maid, she's all old and shit, you know? They build on this by stating that she's not actually a ghost then, since other ghosts in the house don't end up aging. However, this can be disproven in an endless amount of ways. I'll just show you that in Apocalypse, we see her actual bones being dug up and moved away from the house, so she's definitely dead. Her two appearances are just how people see her, a young promiscuous maid or an old maid. Every Jessica Lange theory is Constance using time travel. Referring back to the theory of Constance being a witch, this entry builds on that, saying she was so powerful to even have the power of time travel just like Mallory. The theory says that pretty much every mystery in the show relating to her can be explained by her power of time travel and possibly being related to her previous Supreme. The Zodiac Killer Paradox. In real life, nobody knows the real identity of the Zodiac Killer, but in the cult season, they say that it was actually a group of women who came up with the identity of the killer. However, I genuinely couldn't find any mentions of a paradox surrounding these characters in the show. It's possibly just referring to the deviation on real history taken in the season. American Horror Stories is set in our universe. This is pretty much just talking about how the show makes a very meta approach and how they handle the murder house related episodes of American Horror Stories. All 3 episodes actually turn out to be a game made in our universe because the mom who made it talks about having watched the American Horror Story show on TV as her inspiration. The aliens in Asylum represent God. We first see aliens be in the AHS universe in Asylum, where Kid Walker and Alma get abducted and experimented on. I assume this idea was brought about before the 10th season, where we find out that aliens have been making a deal with the government to experiment on random citizens in exchange for peace, but the entry itself refers to these aliens as a sort of representation of God, which I personally don't see, but I guess any sort of higher power like that could be considered a God-type figure. The 10 Commandments killer was Alex. At the beginning of the Hotel season, we had no idea who the 10 Commandments killer was, and some people theorized that it was Alex, a mother whose child had recently been kidnapped. I personally abstained from watching the season because it's just so mid, and I'm sorry if I get some of this wrong, but the killer turned out to be John Lowe. John was a sort of successor to James March, who trained him to be the killer he turned into. He then went on a killing spree of murders, killing 10 people for breaking different commandments. Ramona is Monet. Ramona Royale is a character in Hotel that used to be an actor in the late 70s. Monet is a character from Roanoke that portrayed the role of Lee Harris in the show within the season. I couldn't really find anyone claiming this theory online, so I did my best attempt to make it make sense. I only really see their shared trait of acting talent to be what could consider them the same person, but here the timelines really just don't line up all that well. Ramona also ends her season off by staying at the Hotel Cortez as its new owner. Kai is the reincarnation of Tate. Okay, another theory here, this one is just a stretch that the weird Tate fangirls are making in an attempt to see their character again. Obviously, Tayden Kai are both played by Evan Peters, so they've got that going for them. However, given that a new baby would be born with his soul right after his death, by 2018, when Cult took place, the reincarnation would be about 24 years old, while Kai is 30 in the show, which kind of just disproves this. Along with that, the reincarnation wouldn't really make any sense in the show because Tate's soul is already trapped in the murder house anyways. Freak Show and Cult take place in different universes than the rest of AHS. At first glance, these seasons really don't seem to connect to any other parts of the series, but if you take a closer look, you can see a few instances where other parts of the show are referenced in this season, implying that they all exist in the same universe, even if the seasons aren't really directly tied to anything else. In Asylum, we find out about Pepper's backstory, and it turns out she's the same person that was in Freak Show. Cult is definitely the most separated season. There was actually a deleted scene in episode 11 where a character uses a Hotel Cortez lighter, but it was later removed. American Horror Story Civil War. Figuring out about this actually just got me really upset, essentially, because the hotel season, the worst season, was apparently supposed to be Civil War instead. In an interview with the Daily Beast, Matt Bomer said, "Yep, that happened," and explained that he had signed on to the show for a season that was supposed to be set in the Civil War. In a separate interview, Angela Bassett revealed that she also thought the season would be Civil War themed, and it really just hurts that that couldn't have happened because a lot of people think Civil War would be related to Freak Show as they're pretty far in the past, but it really never happened, so fingers crossed it'll happen someday. That was the American Horror Story Iceberg. If you made it this far, definitely subscribe because I make a lot of videos like this, and again, I'm trying to hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so I could definitely use your help.